Well, the big story used to be Eskom. All of a sudden, the VIP protection units for politicians have bumped that off the front page, or the proverbial front page. And who better to talk us through what's going on there than Rory Steyn? He's the former chief of security for Nelson Mandela, co-founder of NSA Global Security Consultants, and a speaker, past speaker at the BizNews conference. Rory joins us now. Okay, silly question. Have you seen the video?
Yes. Good afternoon, Alec, and to everybody watching or listening.
Really good to see you again, Rory.
Likewise.
That video, though, wasn't very good to see. In fact, the interview that Chris Steyn, my colleague, did with Ian Cameron, which has just gone nuts. I think it was more than 60,000 people had seen it within the first 24 hours. YouTube have asked us to put an age restriction of 18 plus on it because of the violence that was shown. That some motorists actually videoed and picked it up. Have you come across anything like this in your long career in private protection or protection of VIPs?
Not personally, Alec. Of course, that video evokes images of George Floyd and other similar incidents, but nothing that I've been exposed to, no.
Can you give us some thoughts or perhaps help us through what happened before the video? What would have occurred, perhaps?
So I don't want to speak to that, Alec, because it's pure speculation on my behalf. So, of course, there are two sides to every story. There may well have been provocation, and even if there was, police officers are held to a higher standard, and especially police officers who serve in that capacity. So they protect a principle. Now, I think that the critical lesson to learn here, and by the way, as I said to you when we chatted offline, I belong to a WhatsApp group that has most, if not all, of our former PPU, that's the Presidential Protection Unit, officers that served during my time when I was privileged to be one of the team leaders of President Mandela's detail. And by the way, I spoke to the other team leader. He called me today, a man I consider to be like a brother to me. Jason Chabalala called me because we feel that we are the keepers or the holders of the standard that we kind of built over time. And now you see something like this and it just destroys it all. So the point is that speaking only for me, so I can't speak to what happened prior to that awful video because I wasn't there. But I was there back in the 90s when we served and protected Madiba. And here is the nub of it. Yes, our primary role was to protect life and limb. But we understood, and I was in speaking to Jason, I was saying, nobody sat us down and explained to or briefed us on the fact that we also have a responsibility to protect our principal's reputation, his image, and his legacy. Now, any action that we took, right or wrong, would in to some extent or to some degree reflect on those reputations, image, and legacy of our principal. And we took that very seriously. So now everybody knows that it was, the protectors assigned to the deputy president doesn't reflect well on him at all. And, people will now be looking to him and his leadership to see how this is dealt with. It's just not good for all of us, Ali. And I can tell you that the sentiment on that WhatsApp group to a man and a woman, and we had some very good women on our team, as I believe I said to you when we did our interview in the Berg, the sentiment is consistent across the board that this is unacceptable on every level. It tarnishes our image. It degrades the standards that we put there, and we are just not happy with what we saw.
Not surprisingly, are you a tight group, a tight-knit group, those who protect VIPs, particularly in the public sector?
Absolutely, and you'll find that is consistent across many special forces teams, people that have kind of gone through a bit of a time together or a trial, or in our case, we were mortal enemies. I mean, we were a bunch of white cops. They were a bunch of soldiers from liberation movements. We were trying to arrest them. They were trying to evade us. And we were throwing history through us together and told us to protect the most famous human being on the planet. And, that was our lot. And we did find one another. And we're very proud of that. Differences will always be there, but respect and professionalism and, a kind of a camaraderie that is very, very difficult to define if you weren't there and didn't live through what we all went through. So we're very proud of that, Alec.
Would Paul Mashatile have had any say in the cops who protected him?
I think so. I'm not sure. Again, I don't like speculating on something that I wasn't a witness to. I think so. And I know that in my own case, when I was asked by the commander of the PPU, because remember that unit didn't exist in 94, it evolved because we had to integrate the non-statutory forces that I spoke about. And so when I was asked, because my predecessor went to study in Canada, and a vacancy appeared, and the commander phoned up and said, would I consider applying? I was then immediately, presented to my principal, which happened to be Madiba. So I would think that there was, and you would, there's always the question of somebody who's in that kind of a leadership position that requires personal protection, who would have his or her own people that they're comfortable with. And they could certainly, make a very profound argument as to why those people would be at least incorporated into whatever protection personnel were going to be assigned. So my assumption is, yes, I think he would have had a say.
I tell you why I'm going along this line of questioning, because there are some reports that Mashatile was indeed in the vehicle, or he was, it's now been said that he wasn't, or he's apparently denied being in the vehicle. But there are reports, and I'm sure they will emerge in the next few days, that he was in the vehicle. Now, if you're in the vehicle, I just want to use a hypothetical instance. Surely, if he'd been angry, and we know he's under a huge amount of pressure, News 24 have done some massive disclosures on his personal financial situation, which must be making anybody who was in that position quite anxious. If he, just for argument's sake, if he said, go and beat those guys up because they're showing me the finger, or whatever it might be, as members of the protection unit, would you have the right to say, sorry, sir, we won't? Or do you just have to go ahead and do it?
Absolutely not. No police officer is bound to have to follow an illegal command. And I would, I cannot see, I don't know, again, I wasn't there, but I cannot see that kind of behavior would have been perpetrated right in front of the principal. And I'm pretty sure that if it was, the deputy president would have had a lot to say about that. I would hate it to be found that was the case, Alec. I doubt it.
So let's just hope and pray that he wasn't in the car, because if he was, my goodness, things could not be that good. Ian Cameron of Action Society says that the blue light mafia, as he calls it, should be banned. What's your view on that?
That would be extreme, and I don't think it would be correct. The fact that blue lights are abused is one thing, but to ban them would be an incorrect step. When you are talking about a motorcade of more than 2 or 3 vehicles, it's entirely appropriate to make use of blue lights, because those are police vehicles, and those kinds of motorcades are run all around the world on a daily basis without any abuse of citizens' rights. The solution is not to ban blue light motorcades. The solution is to apply the rules by which blue light motorcades operate consistently and strictly and professionally. So nobody gets pushed off the road. Every citizen has the same right as a VIP to be on the road. You only turn on the lights and sirens if the safety of your principal is required, or that of the road users. And I can give you 100 arguments why it's also appropriate for the safety of road users that police officers use their lights and sirens, just to call attention to the fact that there's an emergency vehicle coming. Now, that said, there's no justification for when you're late turning on the lights and sirens and pushing people out of the way. So that's a long-winded answer. I don't think you ban them. I think you ensure through training and discipline that they are professionally and appropriately utilized.
When you say when you're late, so now let's assume that the deputy president was not in the vehicle. Would it then be justified to put your blue light on? For instance, when you were driving Madiba around, of course, the blue light would have been on. He was the most famous statesman ever to come out of Africa. But if you guys were in the vehicle, perhaps to fetch him some Kentucky Fried... No, he wouldn't. He doesn't eat Kentucky Fried Chicken. But you know where I'm going with this one.
Yeah, I do. So the answer is that absolutely not. If you are not acting in the execution of your function or your duty to protect your principal, there would be only extreme cases where you would be justified in turning the lights and sirens on, and those would also be in the execution of law enforcement. For example, let's say you were coming from your own home on your way to collect your principal and you saw a crime being committed or a situation in front of you that you as a police officer realize that now I've got to act. Then you can turn your lights and sirens on. Otherwise, you drive to work. Excuse me, I beg your pardon. And once you get to work, you would then only be justified in using those lights and sirens with your principal in the motorcade should, there be a necessity for that.
So there are all kinds of questions that still need to be answered. But I guess the biggest one, and again, referring to Ian Cameron, he says if he was the commissioner of police, these guys would have been arrested. They apparently have been suspended. Is that the appropriate approach given the enormous outcry that there's been from the public?
Well, I think either arrest or suspension would be appropriate given the circumstances, Alex. So the overriding principle here, of course, is that there needs to be a disciplinary or judicial process that needs to be gone through. And all of us are innocent until proven guilty. So whether the circumstances point to they needed to be arrested there and then on the scene, or once they've left the scene and they've been identified, they've been suspended, I think that both are appropriate, as long as there is consequence for their actions, given what we saw on the video and given the fact that those disciplinary proceedings have not yet been begun or concluded, but they must be begun and concluded.
So as a police officer now, going back into those days, if you were driving along the road and you saw this kind of incident happening, as a police officer, would you not be duty-bound to arrest the people who were perpetrating that violence?
Yeah, that was my point. So if other police officers came on the scene while an assault was underway, absolutely. You are well within your rights and probably should immediately effect an arrest. But once the perpetrators had left the scene, then you look at the facts in front of you, you follow the police regulations and the police standing orders as to how a disciplinary process then goes forward. And it may well be that a suspension is the way to go, or it may well be that the investigating officer or whomever decides that still, after the fact, that the perpetrators are placed under arrest and then brought in and the proceedings continue. So there must be fairness and a full procedure, but there must also be justice. And in this instance, I believe that justice must both be done and be seen to be done.
It's interesting, Rory, if there hadn't been the person driving by who took the video and then posted the video to social media, what would be the likelihood, or how would the person who got beaten up forward their case? How would they be able to get justice?
It's a very good question, and that happens all the time, every day, sadly too much in our own country. So let's just say there was this assault. The person who was assaulted and kicked on the ground would go to his or her local police station, or the one in whose area that assault took place, and go and register a case of assault. So that means that his or her statement is taken, it's placed on the case register, and it is assigned to an investigating officer. And it would then have to be investigated and presented before the NPA for a prosecutor to make a decision either way. So that is that person's right, whether or not there was a video taken of the incident. And it's all of our right.
Yeah, you just wonder how far that case would have gone. Just to close off with Rory, when you were involved in the VIP protection services, the budget was 138 million in the national budget. That's in the year 2000, which is kind of around about the time that Madiba left and you left. Today, it's 1.9 billion rand. Okay, let's take inflation into account. The 138 after inflation is 450 today. So we've had a 4.25 times increase in real terms in the VIP protection allocation that we taxpayers are paying. How could that be justified? Were you guys just terribly under-resourced back then?
We were not always fully resourced back then, Alec, but again, you're asking me to speculate, which I don't want to do. I don't have all the facts in front of me. What I can tell you is that any increase in expenditure, and there are good reasons, obviously, for increase in expenditure. That would include new models of motor vehicles that have to be replaced and rotated in and out, equipment such as radios, various other equipment that I don't even want to go into here, but some of the stuff that we carry to do our jobs needs to be procured. But all of it starts with a professional threat assessment surrounding the principle. The wrong way to go about this is just to continue what we have been doing. So you continue to provide the same numbers and the same resources and the same equipment to everybody, without having a look at what is the risk and the threat that individual is exposed to, and what do we need to deploy to mitigate that risk or that threat. That's the modern benchmark that we need to apply. And I would start there. So I'm not an economist. I'm not even a financial person. I can't stand spreadsheets. So you're asking the wrong guy. But with that said, I can tell you that we need to make sure that our police across the board, not just VIP or presidential protection people, we need to make sure that our police across the board are properly equipped, properly and professionally resourced, and above all, Alec, trained. And every time I'm asked to speak on these matters, I do ask the question, where is the training and the intelligence behind what our police do in their fight against crime? And now I'm specifically talking about the fight against crime. Is intelligence informing training what criminal conduct and behavior looks like? And is that training then being given to police so that we're not 3 or 4 or 5 steps behind the criminals? So I will always be an advocate of proper resourcing of our police officers. Many, if not most of our police officers are not properly resourced. And there's many reasons, and politicians will have so many arguments for that. But I'm one who stands behind our men and women in blue to say they absolutely need proper training, proper resources and equipment so that they can do their job. And that is the role of senior management in our police. They need to take care of that thin blue line that stands in the gap for all of us, Alec.
Perhaps the big lesson about all of this is watch out. There's always someone who could be switching
with
on
a camera. Yeah, exactly. As if we haven't had enough examples of that. Why anybody would ever choose to behave like that, apart from the fact that it's completely unprofessional and it's criminal, with all the cameras around, is beyond me.
Would your guys in the PPU group like to maybe tell us that they don't stand with this, or you all on your own here going public? Would the rest of the guys, do they feel just as strongly? Mr. Chabalala, you were talking about earlier.
Some of my colleagues have already been quoted. I read some of the articles and they've spoken out, but I'm just relating what is consistently the messaging on our group, that there's nobody on that group who justifies or even seeks to, what's the word I'm looking for, Alec? To
justify the action.
Condone that behavior, yeah.
Rory Steyn, former Chief of Security for Nelson Mandela and co-founder of NSA Global Security Consultants. And I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.